So good morning, everyone. It's 11 o'clock Eastern in the United States. I think it's already noon where Rodrigo is in Brazil, and different times all over the world where people are joining us for our new weekly Zoom call that started as part of our 46th anniversary commemoration in St. Louis and has morphed into a weekly opportunity in English at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and starting today at 2 p.m. Eastern Time in Spanish. This afternoon, Adela Zayas, who's our International Director of Programs and Partnerships and also the Regional Director of the Latin America and Caribbean Office, will be presenting. It's fully in Spanish, the program, but you're more than welcome to join us if you'd like and to participate and learn more about the really important work that she and our partners and colleagues are doing, particularly in El Salvador, but around the world in response to the COVID pandemic. This morning, we're pleased and thrilled to be joined for this week's virtual forum by Rodrigo Péret, who is a Franciscan brother. Frankly, now one of my oldest friends. The older I get, we've known each other longer. It's kind of funny how that works. We go back to the early 90s, and when I was working in Rome, and Rodrigo was doing remarkable work, particularly with the landless in Brazil at a time of dictatorship there, and a colleague and mutual friend, Anastasio Ribeiro, had disappeared, or, as they say, and we got to know each other, I think, best around trying to secure his release. And over the years, we've worked together on getting Franciscans International started in Geneva, Switzerland, and then when Rodrigo was promoted, he might not have felt it was a promotion, to the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Office as the International Director at the General Curia in Rome, which was kind of a bit of a penance, I think, for Rodrigo in some ways. He is a Franciscan brother of the first OFM friars, and affiliated, historically has an affiliation with a community in Minori, a small town on the Amalfi Coast in Italy, as well as his home in Brazil. He continues to do remarkable work with the landless and around agroforestry and documenting the medicinal properties of the plants in the savanna. And most recently, I think it's fair to say, has really become a leading voice, if not the leading voice internationally on anti-mining initiatives after the disaster, the man-made calamity in Minas Gerais. Is that 2 years now, Rodrigo, that was 2 years ago?
The first one, 5 years, second one, 1 year and a half.
Yeah. So there's a lot he could share with us. We've been honored to have him as a member of the International Executive Board of IPM for a number of years now. And I'm sure you'll all appreciate, if not necessarily enjoy, everything he has to say about the current situation in Brazil, both with their far-right leader and his inability to respond in any kind of sane way to the COVID-19 pandemic, but also with his work around the world related to environmental justice and prioritizing the poorest of the poor, as liberation theology tells us. So I'd like to turn it over to Rodrigo at this point. Thank you, Rodrigo, for being here. It's great to see you. And I know we all look forward to hearing from you and sharing this morning.
Well, good morning to everyone. Thank you, Joe, for the nice words about me. And I feel very happy to be talking to you, and also to the others who are watching on the Facebook, especially because for me, IPM is a family. And I think we are all committed with the same objectives in terms of justice, peace, and the care of creation. But much more than this are our relations, our beliefs, and how we are acting. I just want to know how would we proceed? I talk a little bit, and then we open for a talk among us. My time?
That would be typically people of 15 to 20 minutes maybe, and then we'll open it up for conversation.
All right. So I think we live in in a situation that put us all together. And as I will be talking about situation in Brazil, especially regarding to the US and regarding to the policies, we're going to see that we have lots of things in common. Our crazy president here, our crazy president in the US. But I wanted just to start it with something that we are, because during this time, we've been participating in so many different meetings, webinars, or doing conferences or networking with our groups through the internet, through these platforms. But I'm starting to realize, and I think maybe you guys too, because of the IPM work in different parts of the world, that we are in the same pandemic crisis, but we are living different worlds. There are different forms of experimenting the same pandemic. I think this is the first thing we need to take in our mind, because there are a lot of groups talking about already how do we envision post-COVID, which are the changes that we are living in, and then this is gonna have to reflect in the future. But lockdowns and physical distance are being experimented or lived in a different ways, and poor people have lots of difficulties to live these situations that we are living. Even the means of communications that we are building among us, and how we change relations, how we change the way of working, home office, whatever. But this is not being experimented around the world, and as I'm talking in Brazil, specifically here. How I say, church people in Brazil, I'm part of the Special Commission on Integral Ecology and Mining of the Brazilian Bishops' Conference, and Churches and Mining, the Land Pastoral Commission, and the Inter-Franciscan for Justice and Peace. We see this pandemic as another revealing element, one more alert and an intensifier of the ongoing process of the social environmental collapse, deepening the conflicts between political actors on the scene. This process is driven by a number of synergic crises that degrade climate, health, democracy, and intensify socioeconomic inequality. I think these are main issues that we need to be aware when we're dealing with the reflection on this pandemic. Therefore, the current pandemic must be understood in the context of a convergence of this social environmental crisis. If we consider these synergies of these crises, for take stock of the impact steering process of the pandemic, I say now we can try to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I think we need to embrace the crisis. We need to see what the crisis means, especially on our society, on indigenous people, on women, on the poor, on the Black population, on the working class people, particularly in Global South. COVID-19 pandemic is a common threat that has far-reaching social-economic and political effects. But the poor and the vulnerable, again, are often most at risk of suffering injustice in these situations. There is an interesting study from the United Nations University that's saying that the economic crisis that will come caused by the coronavirus could push over 500 million people into poverty. It means 8% of the total human population, unless urgent actions take place. So this compromises a lot of things. If we see the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations, the so-called Sustainable Development Goals, on no poverty or zero hunger, it's under considerable threat. So this is the main, I would say, vision that I, and not myself, but talking, listening, learning, and trying to understand. Situation in Brazil, it's insane, I would say, as a definition. In Brazil, we have 800,000 people contaminated. These are the figures from yesterday. It's a little bit more than 800,000, but with more than 41,000 deaths. In 33 days in Brazil, we jumped from 10,000 to 41,000. So the projections, the mathematical models are showing that at the end of July, if we continue this way, and these are all underestimated statistics, we may have 137,000 dead people if nothing's changed. It was 52 days since the first death for the country to reach the milestone of 10,000. And between March, this was between March 18 to May 9, and a little more than 1 month to reach 41,000 dead. And then we see, when we see the figures, and these are all come from universities, because federal government, it's even saying that's not necessary to make statistics. How can you control a pandemic if you don't have statistics? How can you control a pandemic if you don't have kit tests for the at least big part of the population? Just for the case who are getting into the hospital, the people going to the hospital, how many people are dying in their houses? So COVID kills 55% of Black hospitalized people and 38% of whites in the country. So it's already start showing that within this, there's a huge inequality that has to do with the structural racism that we live in. I figure that in the US is not very different than this. And the chances of death, this is another study that was done, the chances of death by COVID-19 in hospitals in municipalities with average of the development, the Human Development Index is 64.3%. In the municipalities with low average, with low Human Development Index. For the ones who highest is 32.9. And there's another way of looking for this reality. The difference is even greater in relation to education. So now we target the issues of poverty. The chances of death of a person with no education is 71.3%, are almost 3 times greater than for patients with high education, 22.5. As you know, it's not only the issue of knowledge or whatever, but are the possibilities of those poor people in terms of health, in terms of food, but in terms of following the protocols, even the protocols from the World Health Organizations. They are not adequate for those people who are living in poverty. And I would like now to target 2 realities. Let's go to the Amazon region and see the situation of traditional communities and indigenous people, and then go back to the cities where most of Brazilian population live. It's interesting that in the contemporary world, the notion of the forest that we have, forests are lungs, which produce oxygen. And this notion is growing with all the climate change discussion and this idea that we need to take care of the planet. In times of pandemic, the Amazon has not only been violated by deforestation that devastate forest cover, or by agribusiness, or by mining, or by hydroelectric plants that contaminates, dry, and block the water veins and everything. The lack of oxygen now is now revealed by the indigenous genocide and the forest populations. Never, and this is incredible from the studies that are coming out, never in the history of Brazil has a viral epidemic spread so rapidly among indigenous people. So it's growing very, very, very fast. All nations, all native Brazilian nations are affected by the virus. Indigenous people and their organization, they are insisting, denouncing that the Brazilian government does not adopt sanitary measures in a planned way to face seriously the threats of the COVID. And this is becoming each time more evident with the lack of health professionals. We have the state of Roraima, which is near to Venezuela and the Amazon region. There is the army set campaign hospital, but there are no doctors. You remember that we had a health policy social program before. We had thousands of doctors from Cuba, but with Bolsonaro and the coup in 2016, they expelled all of them. So there's a lack of doctors, not because we don't have doctors, but doctors concentrate, in the wealthy areas. But this is all in terms of the health system, nurses, nursing technicians, epidemiologists, and things. So the arrival of COVID-19 also highlights the fragile communication and information structure, shows that the clarification measures and other actions were taken late with the indigenous populations regarding to this pandemic. And it's incredible because the economical pressure in those areas are getting bigger because the government is flexibilizing, kind of sweeping out all the protection laws for the environment in such a way to open for more deforestation, for illegal mining, but also for mega mining. So you have a presence of a lot of people. Just to understand, in Brazil, mining never stopped in anywhere, and it was considered by the federal government as essential activity. So now you can understand the power of the companies, and this is all over the country, and something that is evil that we call contamination leads to speculation in profits. So the result of the spread of the COVID, especially in the Amazon area, but all over Brazil. Brazil becoming a hotspot place on contamination. This was spread, of course, in the market. Guess what happened? World, let's see, iron ore. The world iron ore futures prices have exceeded $100 per ton. Now it's 105 because they're saying Vale, which is a big producer of iron, not producer, you don't produce, you extract. Extractor of iron especially for China, who is recovering now and start buying again. And this just in the past 30 days, the prices rose 24%. So those big corporations, they're getting a lot of money. And just in this type of market, there is a huge competition between Brazil and Australia. Rio Tinto in Australia and Vale in Brazil. And they're all saying that they will still produce what they had prospected for the year, millions of tons. And so this is one aspect that I would like to underline. But from an urban perspective, the cities, the pandemic highlights, I think very clearly, the contradictions of the cities. The urban space is at the same time, it sometimes concentrates wealth and poverty. This is nothing new, especially Latin American countries, in Africa, So while the city collects and aggregates people, it simultaneously creates social special spaces of exclusion, segregation. So this explains the increase in homeless, the growth of slums, street people. Okay. So what was one of the, if you can say before, gifts of an urban area? Proximity, conviviality, agglomeration. So urban forms of living. At the same time, there's a conflict with social prophylaxis to slow down the contamination. So this conflict, this crisis, is being exacerbated by the fast, the contamination grows because urban areas, especially in the poor areas where people are really concentrated. And you can avoid, if I work today to eat tomorrow, how can you stay at home? So, and then the government is feeding a fake conflict, which is, you can choose, probably die by the virus, or certainly die by hunger. So this situation is very exacerbated by the fast and strong reality of the cities, because the cities is a business and a place of circulation of wealth, you know, and then came the reaction from business people, from economic areas. The government doesn't want really to invest on people. You know, there are some urgent economic policies give to help, you know, the less of income people in informality. We discovered, because the government decided under pressure from the opposition to create a so-called universal basic income, which is $100 per family, and people should register it. We discovered that we have millions of people not registered. I'm not saying not with a tax number or ID, with no registration. They're not only they were not only in the formal economy, but they were invisible. And now we're starting to see that a lot of people are going to the streets because they can rent a room, they can't rent a house. So numbers of street people, street families are really enlarging, and so together with this, we experience a very big paradox. Why doctors, the health experts are saying something, the president is saying another thing. He minimized the pandemic, naturalized this, and not being a doctor, he prescribed medicines. And as if that were not enough, Brazil should be the only country in the world that in this right moment, in the middle of a crisis, we do not have a minister of health. 2 resigned in sequence in less than 1 month, and they put previously a military general. 45% of the Brazilian government in the first level and second level those offices are run by militaries. It's more than we have during the military regime before, you know, but all under some legal perspective, you know. This is democracy. To add to this, this irrationality, we experience a deep political and institutional crisis, the result of a government policies which threaten state institutions and seeks to establish struggle to dominate the legislative and judiciary branches. Every week, people are his supporters, which is a very small group, but very active, are going to the streets demanding the closure of the Congress, the Supreme Court, and asking for a military intervention to give the president full powers. And these acts are illegal and go directly against the Constitution, but nothing happens. At the same time, the president and his family, they face accusations, investigations in relation to involvement with militias in the state of Rio, crimes. His family is involved what we call the cabinet of hate. It is a fake news factory that's still on since the elections. So I think this process, as I said, has reached the whole government. It's in practices a lot of flexibilization of legislation, opening, because they're saying the future, we will need jobs, we will need more extraction, we will need to reinforce the companies, etc. We have something interesting happening that came as positive from the massive protests in the United States after the assassination of George Floyd. In Brazil, some movements have also decided to move and are carrying out protests on the streets, but still without the presence of parties or unions, just connected some, which is interesting, some social movements. The fear of the virus and the attention to social isolation make these movements of taking the streets a little quite slow, but it's a response. Now, there are already, since the beginning of the reactions in the US, here also, we have a systemic police violation against Black population, against the poor, but also the issues of anti-fascist groups. And it's interesting that it's growing also among the soccer fan clubs that are going out to the street, which is really interesting, because then it's not only the regular left groups or social movements, but regular common people, especially from the periphery, are saying this is too much. I think we have a lot of challenges, and what we've been doing, and I start closing this first talk. We are trying to respond the first needs. We believe hunger will not stop after the pandemic. We don't believe, I myself, I don't believe the world will change. People will, when we saw now, because they opened everything this week, there are lines in front of the shopping centers. We realize that the poor population, they don't follow some protocols, but it's not only a question of knowledge, understanding the necessity, but it's a necessity of survival, which is making it much more worse. So there are a lot of initiatives in terms of food, feeding the communities, the people. On our region here, we are working close together with the landless movement and the homeless movements and some unions. We are not used to do this before, to do more assistentialistic service to the population. We used to struggle on political issues, demanding land, demanding jobs, and things like that. But it's extremely important because we see that from this, we can build a sense. It's not easy. It doesn't mean if you do this, it's going to happen. But if we are able to handle this, in a sense, to be talking, when possible, to these communities with volunteers. We have community, in some places we have communitary kitchens, because people, they don't have the means to cook and we try to deliver in different places for not concentrating people. But together with these movements, we are trying to show the people we need to establish solidarity relations. We need to establish economy of care among us. And in many other places that we've been talking, Franciscans also in Sao Paulo, in Rio, doing about the same, because the idea is people will, of course, in the middle of a suffering, people will recognize who were there with them. And if we can involve the leaderships in the periphery of the cities, in the outskirts of the city, in the slums, in the occupation areas of the landless or of the homeless. In this, we can be starting new struggles. Of course, after maybe it will not be easy to take back land occupations, or the environmental, or the care for the planet. Even in the narrative of mining, what's about to talk about 207 people who got killed on a crime of the dam collapse 1.5 years ago, when we have 41,000 people already dead from this contamination, from this pandemic, extremely politicized. And so even the narrative we need to review, and those and the lobby of those big corporations trying to help. You know, the mining companies, they try to help, you know, with equipments and things like that. So everything is to be done, but we believe that if we can arrange, let's see, we're trying to put together those who are in the country and those who are in the cities, social movements. How can you help? You got through the struggle a farm and the granary reform and the land reform. Now, can you help those families who are starving? So we're trying to do this. We're trying to be present and to talk, to reflect, to see. When the government started with the so-called, and I finished, basic income, we helped them how to use the internet to register and things like that, and talk, to see the situation, to be present. So this is a new relation that has a lot of political implications in the future, when the people will be struggling for employment, for eating, for survival. In the middle of all this, we will have also to struggle for our universal health system that exists, but it's under attack. It was under attack before, and if we have something that is facing the problem, it's because we have a universal health system, public hospitals that are really receiving all the burn of the situation. So this is what we're trying to, this is how we see and what we're trying to do.
Fine. Okay, I think I've unmuted now. Thank you, Rodrigo. You think I would know how to do this by now, but Zoom continues to be a challenge.
That's right.
We're thrilled to have so many people on the call and on Facebook, and we have a number of questions already in the chat function on both. So I'll read the first one that I saw from Mahesh, who, for those of you who may not know, is our regional director for South Asia, based in Ahmedabad, which is dealing with their own dramatic rise in the novel coronavirus and COVID-19, and a reminder that Mahesh and Hemit will be joining us next Friday at 11 o'clock for our virtual forum at that time, particularly focused on Hemit's work in Golana. But Mahesh is asking, how is the judiciary responding to these issues? Initially, there wasn't much response from them. It's only recently that they have become proactive, it seems, on COVID matters, and that's the case in India. How is the judiciary responding in Brazil? If that's a relevant question.
Well, the judiciary is waking up now. because they were before involved in this all strategy of criminalizing politics. You remember that the last decade, we've been discussing a lot about corruption, but from a moral perspective. And then just like we believe that the system works, and then there are packet of people, some people who becomes immoral. He corrupts, but we never discuss the system as corrupt. Part of it's systemic corruption. You know, the corruption makes part of the system. When we see now that the companies are making money from the pandemic, and they are forcing the government because of the perspective of how it's going to be deep, the economic crisis. This is corruption. Oh, this is criminal. So now, because of the threat that the judiciary is having, because the president and his group, nowadays in the statistics, they are 30% support. Bolsonaro has just 30%, and the radicals maybe 10%. The crazy ones who go to the street like the militias, like Mussolini or whatever. But because they are being threatened, they saw that what they did, you know. If you remember all the judicial process who passed a lot of the politicians before were illegal, you know. Someone is arrested and stay in jail before to be interrogated. What are you doing? You are threatening the person, you know, you arrest for interrogation. And even the person is not going to disappear, is not intervening in the process and things like that, you know. So you're right. It took a little bit, but we don't know now if they have much power to do so. But they start some very important investigations.
Thank you. In the chat function, Alyssa Bovell, our IPM colleague and friend in Atlanta, is just thanking you, Rodrigo, for highlighting the different ways that inequalities are overlapping in relation to COVID, environmental injustices, and racism. I think you did a wonderful job of calling out the intersection there. Mark Falbo sent I think a comment and a question. It's a little lengthy, but I'll read it to you. It's valuable to listen to our sisters and brothers name the structural and systemic sins happening around the world. Listening is a kind of solidarity. There are additional challenges, and I worry that given the depth of structural and systemic injustice in individual countries and common among countries can be overwhelming and paralyzing. What can one or a small group, think of Margaret Mead, do in the face of such situations? I'm not looking for our low-hanging fruit, but about what can be done individually or by small groups, but how do we cultivate resilience among people seeking solidarity? Sorry, I know this is long, but I think it's a good question. And he adds, he just adds, Rodrigo, that these video gatherings remind him of his college days visiting the Catholic Worker in New York City. And, you know, he knew Dorothy Day and Peter Morin. And Peter would say the clarification of thought is the first step in confronting afflicted and afflicting, comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. Sorry.
Yeah, I would stress more on the issue of this solidarity issue and the question of how can we maybe build networks of solidarity. I think this is very important. I see that in this moment, there's not much to do than to help, to be with, to be solidary. Of course, some people can be more or they can be less. I have to stay at home on the group of risk and things like that. I talk, people come and then, but I would say, how can we interconnect the essential and urgent needs of the people for surviving with the perspective of thinking what's happening, and how can we put together? How can we come together with us, with some organizations that normally, I would say, are in the struggles, especially in Latin America, and see, look, the goodness that you have can help here. We are building new relations. Solidarity, it's a way, it's an economic issue that we need to build social solidarity. We need a more solidary state, and then maybe why we're doing this, to see how to build, how we were built. I think the States is the same. Brazil, United States, we were built on an inhuman system. Slavery economically benefited the US, but economically benefited Brazil, and shaped our culture and our society. So it was racism as well capitalism that brought about the birth of our nations and the values. So I think we need to face up our past by creating a truce and reconciliation among us, but from concrete gestures, you know, because what I'm really worried in the case of Brazil, because the TV, the news are always showing that people, they don't stay at home. So where they go? To the poor areas, you know, and then of course they can't stay at home. Can you imagine a family living in one room? When I sneeze in my house, the other get, then the next door you get the virus, or if I am on the streets. So I think this is lots of people in different countries are saying that these are the embryos of the new struggles.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Really prophetic words. Very struck by what you're sharing. I just want to, Terry Matuku, who's affiliated with our project partner, the Kandula Community Development Project in Kajiado, in Machakos, Kenya, is commenting, a bit of a comment and question. It's really sad to see what's happening in Brazil and other countries where autocratic leaders are instigating fear and violence instead of mitigating the pandemic strategically and giving hope, calm, and peace. More of a comment than a question, but certainly a concern, as has been mentioned by Mahesh, in India, in Brazil, in El Salvador, with the new leader there who has used this pandemic as an opportunity to crack down on all kinds of dissent and further militarize their government, and in Kenya, as many of us are well aware. Are there any questions from any of you on the Zoom call? Please raise your hand, or wave as they say on Zoom, and unmute yourself. Looks like Sarah, who is in Cleveland, has a question for you, Rodrigo.
Yes. So comparing Brazil and America, and we talked a lot about these similarities, and one thing that I've observed is that they're very much related to the corruption you speak of. That, you know, there's a difference in how things are playing out with the national government, but then also regional governments, the governors of states and local mayors implementing protective measures. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but much like in the United States, they have this tug of war with the national government. And on that local level, sometimes money that's donated to improve a community or health centers gets taken by corrupt politicians. And it, along with that, you have the separation of the universal health care, but then also the private system. And so there's a lot of people, you know, as you talked about the difference in wealth between, within one city, even within the healthcare system, the elite and the wealthy can access this private system where everyone else is struggling. So from your perspective, could you talk a little bit more about what it's like on the ground with this, the corruption, but then also the positives of governors and mayors trying to resist the government, and the big flu hoax perspective on COVID, and how maybe some regions or some localities are doing better, or maybe the private healthcare system is making it worse?
Yeah, yes. I think there is just already a struggle among public and private initiatives. If we see on our system, most research are done by public autarkies, foundations like Fiocruz and Butantan and others, you know. But slowly, the private corporations, pharmaceutical and others, are being more highlighted. They want to, and there's another struggle, which every day on TV, you showed how much money this company is giving, how much money the banks are giving, and this is a way of corruption also, because corruption comes from the word in Latin, corruptus, the corruption of the heart, you know. So I think this is within our societies. We didn't have strong political and also support, let's see, to take over the private hospitals. I think in Spain it happened with some hospitals that they need, because sometimes we still have intensive care beds free in the private hospitals, but not in the public ones. Of course, there's a huge competition in terms of equipments for those who need to breathe and everything. And this is another case. But I would say it was interesting, the intervention of the governors and the mayors, because our federation, our system it's a little bit alike, but the U.S. Federation, the union, it's different, because the state, they have a little bit more flexibility and power for decision. Here it was all concentrated. So that's where, and maybe I can answer what the other question related to the judiciary, because when the governors, everyone was seeing nothing was happening, the governors came, and there is also a consortium of the governors from the Northeast. They negotiate directly with China, without Brazilian government, and the mayors. And then suddenly he sent a bill that all these decisions should be done by him. And the Supreme Court said, this is illegal. The Constitution doesn't support what you want. Of course, this decision is clear, it's okay, but it's because of the situation. I would doubt if they would say that before, you know. But this thing is so insane, and I think what's happening now in Brazil, when people is reacting, unfortunately, we have to conquest the streets, and this has a price. There's a price for this, you know. But if we don't do this, so now all the countries saying no, the streets are not from them. They are not. He doesn't have the support that he had. But one thing is true. There is already some corruption in those when you make contracts with big corporations and firms, especially the expedition from China that doesn't come, or when they come, there's another equipment or things like that. It's already on. But the main reason is the incapacity of the society to react. I give an example. Maybe it's been showed by the media in Brazil, then different what happened. But yesterday, because we have this military threat here, they showed what I think it's the chief commander of the US Army, who was with Trump when he visited the chapel in Washington, and he asked excuse because he was together with Trump, and it was politically used. And then he said, the armed forces are not supposed to have, are not political bodies, you know, which for us was interesting. Never, it's impossible to happen here.
Yeah. Thank you, Rodrigo. So there's a number of comments and a couple of questions, so I want to try to get to those. Carol Finling, who was one of the founding mothers, if you will, or is one of the founding mothers of IPM in Chicago, commented, hearing Rodrigo, IPM is amazing that we are already doing the solidarity, or they are already doing the solidarity. I'd say we, Carol, couldn't do it without you. The economics, the education, continue what you are doing. I think there are similar situations with Native American communities. She's asking if we have a comment from Caroline Mills, our former board chair, who's Shoshone, about that. I have not heard directly from Carol, but I can tell you I heard from Candy Boyd, who's a Quaker who's worked for decades now with the Lakota people. And we were in communication last week. And when I posted that article related to anti-racism and Pentecost, and she had some really powerful and disturbing things to share with me about the spread or the fear of the spread of COVID among the Lakota. I also know one of the Wabanaki community ambassadors here in Maine who recently commented of their fear of what could happen, particularly if you think of like the Penobscot, when you have 500 people, which is I think 1/5 of their remaining population, all centered on one island in a river near Orono. And if COVID would get to that island, it could, you know, wipe out the community in ways not too dissimilar from what happened in our history with smallpox and other things. We have a comment from Luz Dari, who's just, you know, thanking, it's in Spanish, so I won't read it, but just sending her blessings and gratitude to Rodrigo, particular for the work that you're doing in Brazil. And we have a question here from Alyssa. Rodrigo, can you talk about some of the gender implications of the COVID pandemic and how it has compounded existing vulnerabilities and inequalities? So what are the gender implications, or how does gender impact the response in Brazil to COVID? Who's being impacted and how it's being addressed?
Well, I think one very bad statistics that came out from this pandemic, and of course, as a result of the necessity of to be at home, it was the huge increase of domestic violence and the numbers of women that were being attacked by men in their homes, you know, by the partner, and this is very, very huge. There is also, but these things, there is the majority of confirmations are in women around 30 to 49 years old. Most 62% of the positives are women, but there's not much written the causes, I would say, and why, you know. But there is a huge discussion in terms of domestic violation increasing in the numbers, and which was a reality in the society, but it got worse because of the pandemic.
Thank you for sharing that. For those of you who may not have seen it, I'll try to share it later. Carlos Diaz, who runs the Patronato Lidio Cocholo, one of our project partners, longstanding partner in El Zaite, El Salvador, posted a very, I was telling a friend this morning, almost difficult to watch video of a young Salvadoran woman speaking about what's happening in the country with women being confined at home. And I think Adela can correct me, but there's been something like 25 feminicides just since COVID. The lockdown started in El Salvador of women in their homes, and it's a picture of a young woman who is sort of the screen, and the video moves on. You can see the different bruise and bleeding and other things on her body, but also the names of the women that have been killed are kind of written in red ink on her face and her chest. It's quite powerful. We'll try to share it later on Facebook. Terry, again, in Kenya, is just pointing out that I think, well, she's in Toronto, but she's Kenyan. I think that also a challenge to civil societies, NGOs, churches, and human rights activities to strongly defend citizens and fight against the misuse of COVID funds. The Catholic bishops of Kenya, for example, recently issued a strong statement against government embezzling COVID funds. It's our responsibility to hold our leaders accountable. Citizens, too, are taking responsibility and calling on government through social media to stop the misuse of funds. I'm sure some of you also saw the headlines here in the United States where that's been the case in many localities coming out recently. Anyone else on the call, on the Zoom call, that would like to get a question in before we wind down? We're at noon now. I'm sure Rodrigo's a little flexible in his time, but we want to honor our commitment to try to stick to an hour. Anyone have a question or comment? The Facebook feed is a little delayed, so I'm sorry if you're on Facebook. You need to just, maybe we'll take a moment to see. Okay, well, if there are no further comments at this time, I'd like to thank you again, Rodrigo, for that excellent presentation and thought-provoking presentation. Muito obrigado, as we would say in Portuguese with my pathetic Portuguese. Thank you for reminding me, sir. You know, Rodrigo is obviously a member of our international board of directors, and depending on travel, we may be seeing each other sometime soon in the United States. And certainly if he comes for a meeting here, we'll be glad to have other forums and opportunities to meet with him in person for those of you who are in Cleveland or St. Louis. We're going to wind down now with a reminder that next Friday at this time, Hemant Chawan, who's the first IPM fellow working in Golana, India, will be speaking. We tried to have him present, you may remember, a month or so ago, and the internet connectivity wasn't very good, and so Mahesh has been working with him on that, and Mahesh and Hemant will be joining us next Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, which is something like 9:30 in the evening in India, for our Friday virtual forum. And also a reminder that this afternoon at 2 o'clock, we'll have the opportunity, particularly for those of you who either have Spanish or want some practice, to listen to our International Director of Programs and Partnerships, Adela Zayas, to present an update on the work and the way that IPM has been responding to COVID-19 in her home country of El Salvador, but throughout Latin America and around the world. So thank you all. Thank you. Obrigado again, Rodrigo, and may the peace that passes all understanding be with you all this weekend.
Okay, thank you very much for all of you.
Muito obrigada, Rodrigo.